Hi, it's Gareth Lock from The Human Diver. Thank you very much for the invitation to present at your conference. Unfortunately, I can't be there in person. I'm standing on the shore of the Delaware River in Philadelphia, and I'm delivering a safety leadership program to a ports and maritime company here before going off to Vancouver next weekend. And that means I can't be there. But when I spoke to Sam and Sandy about recording a video to present on the role of human factors in diving, they were both game on for that. And that's what I'm going to talk about here today, is this idea that accidents and incidents in diving aren't just down to a lack of technical skills or equipment failures. Invariably, it's the stuff that goes on between our ears and between the people that cause the biggest issues. The ability to perceive what's going on so that we can make the best decisions possible, to be able to understand what's happening and then communicate it to our team. The ability to project into the future and operate as a team effectively so we can look out for each other. And there's an example of that. There's a story that I'm going to tell about a pair of technical divers who were out in Malta a number of years ago, and they were doing a week of advanced trimix diving, so 75, 80-meter diving. And they'd finished doing a 30-minute, 65-meter bottom time, and they ascended. No particular issues, all the decompression plans, obligations were followed through. Breathing 1555 as trimix, 50%, 100% deco. And when one of the divers got on the surface, they started to dekit, and they had some visual disturbances. And they thought, that's a bit odd. But they didn't have any other signs and symptoms of decompression sickness. So they just sort of ignored it, didn't say anything to their buddy. And then the 30-minute boat ride back into the quayside, those visual disturbances disappeared. And one of the things they picked up was actually as they were getting off the boat to then lift gear onto the flatbed truck, that as they sort of bent down, picked up the twin set, that they had a big flash of light. And they sort of went, this is interesting. I've got a PFO, because they'd recognized there is a link between aura from migraine and PFOs. So in this case here, the diver, again, didn't say anything to anybody. And they, after a little while, appeared to be fine, and they flew home the following day back from Malta. And I'm going to ask you the question, what is the first thought that comes into your mind about that diver? Knowing the story that I've told you, and that's all there is. And the bit here is, actually, I was that diver. I was the person who flew home the following day. I didn't have any signs and symptoms. I just thought that it's a bit odd. Now, there were also pressures involved. I was out there with my girlfriend, now wife, and we were due to fly home the following day. And I knew that if I'd gone to the chamber, even just for a precautionary check, I probably wouldn't be able to fly home the following day, and that would cause us a problem. I didn't want to say anything to my buddy. I didn't want to look stupid. I followed all of the stops as planned, so why would I have decompression sickness? So I flew home and I contacted my tech instructor, and I said, hey, Rich, what's the name of the diving doctor in Bristol who deals with PFOs, holes in the heart, Peyton Foreman, Avali? And he said, it's a guy called Mark Turner. So I phoned Mark up, and we had a conversation. He's an ex-Royal Navy diving doctor. And I talked about what I'd done and the gases and the decompression profile. And he said, you know what, you tech divers, you're all a bunch of beep guinea pigs. You're pushing boundaries that you don't understand. And I thought, okay, that's fair. In the Navy, the commercial diving sector, they have many more structures in place to maximize safety. So he said, well, it does sound like a PFO, but the only way we can test it and to confirm that is to do a test. So I went into Bristol and I found out that I'd got an 8 millimeter by 12 millimeter hole in my heart. And that got fixed through the NHS. Unfortunately, that can't be done, not in England anyway. And I haven't had any issues before. And the reason I tell this story and the way I tell it is because I can pretty much guarantee that when I asked you to think about what your thoughts were about that diver, they would have been judgmental. And that is normal human nature. We hear a story, it's incomplete, we don't have all of the data, the information that's there, and as a consequence, we fill the gaps with what we think should happen. These counterfactuals, these should have, could have, would have. And the purpose of developing human factors programs it covers multiple facets. But the first one is to understand how and why we behave the way we do, why we are successful and why we have failed outcomes. Because once we understand that human performance variability, the fallibility, the successes, then it's easier to dig deeper into the story and understand how it made sense for those people to do what they did. And that, by digging into the stories and understanding what goes on, means that we can develop programs that address the weaknesses in our decision making, the weaknesses in our situation awareness, the inability to communicate effectively across the teams. Just because I'm transmitting something to you now, it doesn't mean that it's landing and it's understood as intended, my intention. It's how we can develop programs that help effective teamwork so that we've got a shared mental model within the team, so that it's a good idea. We know what's going to happen next. Many times we get in the water and we make assumptions, and those assumptions are normal human behavior, but sometimes we have to validate those critical assumptions, those ones that are going to catch us out and cause us problems. And then this idea of understanding the roles of leaders and followers in the diving space. Every instructor is a leader of an instructional team. Your students are your followers in your team. And that means that we role model, we behave certain ways. We've got to demonstrate what a good leader looks like. And then we understand these things called performance influencing factors. Stress, fatigue, they're main ones. But we could also look at how equipment's designed, the fatigue and stress that we have due to temperatures, be that warm or cold, normally cold in Scotland, limited visibility, how that impacts our awareness about what's going on. And then finally, this ability to share stories. We talk about psychological safety and just culture. And a psychological safety is this shared belief within the team that it's okay to take an interpersonal risk. And by that, I mean, I can ask a question, I can challenge what's going on. And we have to overcome this authority gradient that's present. And that authority gradient might be because of experience, it might be because of age, it might be because of the position that you hold within a dive club or a dive center. So the programs that the Human Diver puts together, and what I've been working with Sam and Sandy, is to give some of your senior instructors access to the Essentials program. And that's a condensed program. It's about 3.5, 4 hours that talks about these concepts, these tools, these processes to help us make better decisions in the activities we do. And I'm hoping that some of them will have completed that program before the conference happens. I know some of them have already started it. And the Human Diver is very much about making these tools, these concepts accessible. And I have just started a concise version of the Under Pressure book. And you can find that online if you just Google for it, or we can put a link into the conference proceedings so that people can go and follow through on that. I said we talk about making things accessible. There are more than 400 blogs out there all around human factors, non-technical skills, just culture and psychological safety. And there's a really powerful documentary that I know that Sam has used in some of her training deliveries for the instructor development programs. And that's called If Only. And what that does is it tells the story of a tragic, fatal diving event that happened a number of years ago. And it tells it in two forms, in the same way that I told my story, that first story, that judgmental story. And what it does is it asks you to think about how and why an event occurred the way it did, and it only gives you limited information. The sort of information you get in a social media post or the annual reports that are produced by certain organizations. And then what it does is it interviews, and we engage with the dive team, with the widow of the diver who unfortunately passed away. And then we start to realize that there are many things going on at that time. It wasn't just an equipment configuration issue. There were many social, cultural, behavioral issues that if, and I'm trying not to use a counterfactual here, if they had applied some of the concepts around human factors, non-technical skills, then the likelihood of that event would have been reduced markedly. And so really it's about exploring how and why we behave the way we do. And that brings me, I suppose, onto my final piece, is about the ability to change our language. We are in control of the language we use. And what we can do is we can start to substitute the question, why did that happen, to how did it make sense for people to do what they did? Because when we ask, why did you do that? Invariably, we're asking people to justify their decisions, their behaviors against my standard. Not necessarily about what you did at that time. Whereas if we ask, how did it make sense? What I'm doing is depersonalizing this, and I'm asking those involved to focus on the behaviors, the context, how it made sense for people to do what they did. Because nobody goes on a dive with the intention of breaking equipment, with the intention of getting separated, with the intention of getting bent or hurt, or even worse than that, dying in the process. So when we start looking at events, ask that question, how did it make sense for those people to do what they did? What were the conditions that were present that led to that event occurring in the way it did? Because we can't change the human condition. We are broadly all wired the same way. And that's why I can take materials from aviation, from healthcare, from oil and gas, from construction, and repackage them and put them into language that divers can use to make their diving safer. And the bit here is that we don't measure safety in diving, we measure unsafeties. What we have to do is create an environment where we can fail safely, that we put barriers and defenses in place, be that training, be that equipment that's certified and serviced, so it's working the way that we want it to work. And then we create situations where we can fail safely. As a team, we can look out for each other. I will make mistakes. I am going to have a problem at some point. But if I'm working as a mutually accountable team, then we can help each other out at that stage. So at that stage now, I'm going to hand it back over to Sam and Sandy, and I hope this has been really useful. If you want to find more about what's going on, go and visit thehumandiver.com or go and visit the Facebook page that we've got, where it is a safe environment to be able to share stories. And I can now see the sun rising on the other side of the Delaware River. Thanks very much, and have a great weekend at your conference.